Hello, everyone. I'm Linda Evans Shepherd, and I'm known as the Prayer Investigator. Today, we're going to be talking about whether or not prayer can cause miracles to happen. Are you interested? I have a special guest, and we are going to be right back to talk about what happened to her and what her conclusions about miracles and prayer are. Welcome back to the Prayer Investigator. I'm Linda Evans Shepherd, and I want to introduce you to my very special guest, Cynthia L. Simmons. Cynthia is a wonderful author. She has been the mom of 5 homeschoolers. She writes historical fiction. She has a wonderful radio show called Heart of the Matter Radio, and she also does Mom Life Chats. Cynthia, welcome to the Prayer Investigator.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
I'm glad that you're here. And listen, we are here to investigate this prayer story of yours. Now, you say that you had a wonderful miracle based on prayer. And what I would love for you to do next is to tell us what happened.
Well, it was a Saturday morning. It was March the 1st, 2008. And I was fixing to go to aerobics. And so I was dressed in kind of clunky clothes because you don't dress up to exercise. I was sitting on the couch talking to my husband, and he slid in the floor and had a seizure. And it was a whole body seizure. It was just really weird because the nurse brain said, this can't be happening. So I ran upstairs and I grabbed my son, who was at that time, in his early 20s, and I asked for help. And so we got my husband on his side and all that stuff. And then I called for help, and it's kind of a long story because it took them a long time to get him out of the house because he's heavy and they didn't want to actually pick him up. But as he started coming out of it, he kept asking, why in the world are people in my house? What are you doing here? And then they would answer him. And the minute that they answered him, he would ask the question again. So he was really confused. And since he had been normal just before that, had been talking, I knew that he'd been sick. He'd had kind of the flu-like symptoms, headache, temperature, that kind of thing for several days, but the doctor said he just had the flu and I wasn't worried about it. But this was a huge change, and I was real concerned because my nurse brain was going, this isn't normal. And they asked me all kinds of questions, the same questions over and over again, because people kept coming in. And finally, they drug him off to the hospital, which I was very glad of. And as soon as they got him in the hospital, he was going, oh, I feel so much better. I'm all okay now. And I'm thinking, you're not okay. And all I could think of was this was a consequence of the flu. However, when they ran tests, all of his blood work came back normal. And that just seemed weird. And I finally said, the night before when he was putting the kids to bed, they said he said weird things. His talking was weird. Now, I didn't hear it, but they did. And the doctor said, oh, let's do a spinal tap. And they did a spinal tap and discovered that his brain was infected. And furthermore, he had been sick since Sunday, and this was a Friday, which meant that he had been sick all week with the brain infection. And we just thought it was the flu. But when they ran tests, he was very seriously ill, and they slapped him into an intermediate intensive care so they could watch him all the time because they were worried about more seizures. So naturally, when the doctors began to come in and tell me how serious he was, I was a little scared. And that's when those moments that you start, you try to pray, and the only prayer that you kind of get out of your mouth is help. You don't really process enough to say, Lord, here's the problem. But the thing I was watching is that my husband's level of consciousness was so bad that when the doctors asked him questions, he just sort of stared at them. And I thought, that is not like him, because he's such a coherent person. He's such an organized person. So his level of consciousness was sinking, and I was getting scared because I thought, this is serious. And so the next day, a doctor came in, and he was a neurologist, and he was doing the same thing, asking questions. And he drugged me out in the hall and told me, well, he is really sick, and don't expect him to go home anytime soon, because when he gets out of this hospital, it will be going to a rehab center for 6 to 8 months to learn how to walk and talk and tie his shoes and put on his clothes. And I thought, I don't think so. I just don't think so, because I know how good he was the day before. And I just said, I just started praying. And I called my pastor at church and told them to start praying. And they had a prayer meeting. And so people all over the world were praying for him. Now, he had a bad case of encephalitis. It was one of the worst cases you can have, and especially because he'd had it for days and we hadn't found it. So people started praying for him. And, given what he had, he probably should have been paralyzed or maybe even dead. Now, we're talking a long period of time, but he was 4 years completely recovering, and he does have some lasting effects, but he is in the top 3% of people that have encephalitis, because most people either become, frozen and so on, and don't even know who they are for the rest of their lives. And there were times I was scared too, because the doctor started asking him, how many kids do you have and all that kind of stuff. And he could name my first 3, but he forgot my last 2. And when the doctor said, "Who is that woman over there?" And I was there the whole time. And he looked at me one time and it was like, can he come up with my name? But he finally said, "Well, that's my wife." And I was going, oh, thank goodness he still remembers me. I mean, he was really serious. But, prayer made all the difference, because people don't come out of that good with something that serious.
Well, I have to ask you, when you realized the situation was very serious and you went to prayer, what kinds of things did you pray and who did you pray to?
Well, I prayed to God, but like I say, I was processing all this stuff like, 90 miles an hour in my nurse brain. And the emotions were there too, but I was trying to keep them kind of under control, because I knew that if I showed a lot of emotion, that was going to interfere with his getting well, and that, he didn't understand and couldn't understand. But if I started crying, it would be a problem. So I was trying to stay on top of stuff. And so a lot of my prayers were, "Lord, help, this isn't good. Lord, help." I mean, I don't think I was very good. I mean, my prayers were not anything you would brag about, but
They weren't the most articulate prayers you
No.
prayed.
I just, I knew all the symptoms. I knew all the stuff that was going on. I knew what they were doing. And I knew that it was really bad, because he just was not communicating, even though I felt like he understood when you said something to him, but he could not talk back. And in fact, when he came out of it, he said that he remembers going into the hospital, and it was a week before he actually really knew what was going on. It was like one morning he woke up and all of a sudden he knew he was in the hospital and he didn't know why. So really all that time, his conscious brain was not working at all.
So you were praying, "Help, this isn't right, help." Your church was praying.
Yes.
And then what happened? Did he just suddenly go, "Okay, let's go home"? I mean, what happened after that?
No, I think there was, like I say, that there was one morning when he woke up, and he did understand that he was very sick, and they had put in a IV in a main vein, because they had to give him medicine that was pretty strong. But then the IV got infected, and so they were battling several different things there for a while. So I think that's why it took him that long to come back around. But again, he was really very sick. And so we're very pleased that not only did the doctor give him the right medication, the day that we took him in, they discovered what the bacteria was. It wasn't even a bacteria, it was a virus. She figured out what virus it was immediately, which was absolutely huge, because he could have had more brain damage. And he does have a hunk of his brain about that big that is a cyst, because it's damaged. It's never going to change. But the day of, she figured it out. So she started treating him. And then, of course, he got the secondary infection. No, I mean, he left the hospital in 11 days, but he was able to walk. He was able to talk. He was able to put his clothes on, go up and down steps. He was able to do most things. But then for probably a month or two, we were struggling with different types of partial seizures till we got his medicine adjusted. So it was a long-term get well. but still it was on the positive end on the long term getting well, because he wasn't in a nursing home, catatonic, like a lot of people would have been. So he wasn't able to drive for at least 6 months, because in Georgia, once you have a seizure, you're not allowed to actually get in a car and drive because they want to get your medicine adjusted. So I had to take him places. He had therapy appointments, and he did not have the ability to pay attention long enough to read a book. And his attention span was shorter. He'd had brain damage, his brain was swelling and all that kind of stuff. So, it was a recovery, even though it was a good recovery. We were probably a year before he was more or less back to work normally. He did go to work after he got out of the hospital, like part of the day and stuff like that. But he was 4 full years getting a recovery to the point that he was a new normal. And I still see him do things that I go, okay, new brain, it's a new brain, not the same brain, not the same person, new brain. Because once you have a head injury, your emotions are altered.
Wow. Well, I know your husband, Ray. He's a great guy, and you would never know that he had been through all of that, which is amazing. But my question is, why do you think God answered your little prayer, help me?
I think, just before all of this happened, I had just started writing. And I think Satan was trying to get me to stop and quit and desist and all that, because my husband is a brilliant man. And if there's any place where Satan could attack him that would be the most personal, the most painful, the most difficult, would be his mind. And it was an attack on who my husband was. And I really think the Lord allowed Satan to do that, but he said, you can go this far, but you cannot go any further, because he could have had a lot bigger problem and a lot more problems coming out of it. But he is essentially healthy, except he has problems with remembering names and naming things. Like there was one occasion when he came downstairs to me and he said, oh, it's raining. I need a rainbow. And I said, you need a rainbow? Because I thought maybe if I said it back, he would hear what he did. And he said, I need a rainbow. It's raining. And I said, I don't have a rainbow. And he said, of course you have a rainbow. I've seen you with rainbows. And I said, no, I have an umbrella, but I don't have a rainbow because you can't buy rainbows. And he said, what did I say? And I said, right category, wrong word. Rainbow is in the category of rain, but it's not rain. You wanted an umbrella. That's a very common mistake that he makes. He will switch a word for something else that's very related. So there are some problems still with language, but nothing like what it could have been with the seriousness of his infection.
Well, it's amazing that he had that kind of recovery. And so do you think that the enemy really attacked your husband to keep you from writing, or is that what you think?
Driving to the hospital one morning, I would get up real early and get there before the doctors got there. And I just felt like, Satan knows how to make me back down, and he thinks that's what he's going to do. And I'm not backing down. I'm not backing down. I taught my son, I have a disabled son, I taught him to talk, and I did a lot of stuff with him. I have the ability to do that again if I have to. With God's help, I'll do it. Help me, Lord. I'm not going to quit. And I really think it was related to that Satan thought he was going to scare me off.
I think that we have to look at our whole situation and determine where, if you called it warfare, spiritual warfare, where that might be coming from. And I do think that the enemy tries to impede us or stop us from carrying out the purposes of our lives. And you feel that very strongly, but you just kept praying, help me, God. And you got through it. Your husband got a huge dose of healing and has been able to go on with his life and has been able to go on with his career and your family life. That is really amazing. And you have been able to go on to write books. How many books have you written to this point?
I've got 6, and I've just got another one that's just been accepted by a press. So that will make another one. And I'm in the process of writing another one at the same time. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you just kept pushing through and kept praying the help me prayer, and God did help you. What would you say to someone who is experiencing some kind of what we call spiritual warfare pushback against their purpose in this particular way, how would you encourage them?
I would say just go before the Lord and pray. And like I said, I was not very wonderful. My prayer was not beautiful. My prayer was not anything to brag about. But I was just honestly saying, Lord, I cannot do this without you. I'm desperate. I need you. Help. And the Lord came through. He gave me wisdom. There were so many times that things happened to him that I didn't understand. He would come to me and he would be in tears and he would go, I'm just so upset. And that was not like him. And so I go, well, let's just try some coffee. And I discovered that when he got that way, that coffee tended to bring him back around. And he would have spells where all of a sudden he would be freezing to death because apparently it interfered with his temperature regulating mechanism. And so I learned to deal with that just by praying and asking God for help. So a lot of weird things happened, but the Lord gave me the wisdom that I needed to walk through them and bring him back so that he's strong now. It's gone. So the Lord got us through.
So in other words, you're saying that through prayer, God helped you figure out the problems that cropped up with solutions.
Yes.
I definitely have noticed that happening in my own life. So that's just amazing. So tell us a little bit more about your podcast and what you'd like to share with our viewers.
Well, I am someone who is really interested in sharing with women how walking by faith makes a difference to your life. And either in the small things or the big things, God is there and he's real. He gets in our lives and makes it better and different. And that's what I'm trying to share with women, wisdom that is timeless from the Lord, because it applies for little kids. It applies for grown kids. It applies for moms, wherever they are, women, wherever they are. You can learn from the Lord. And I have learned a lot from the things that I have walked through. And what I want to do is give that I have learned to other people and share, because that's what the Lord tells us to do in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. It says, when the Lord comforts you, you're supposed to use that to help other people. And that's what I want to do.
Well, it is very interesting that little help me prayer had so much power in it. And it's so exciting to think that when we don't know what to pray, we can just say, God, help me. And we're praying to God, Jehovah, the Father of Jesus Christ, the Son who came to set us free. And I love your story. And I hope that our viewers will write a message to us and tell us about a time that they prayed a help me prayer and God answered for them too. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll be back next week for more prayer investigations. See you then.